A prototype too dangerous to release. It was never supposed to leave the lab, not because it didn't work, but because it worked too well. From a first test run, engineers went quiet. The data looked unreal, and that made everyone nervous. To understand why this prototype was locked away, we need to rewind. Back to a phase when experimentation moved faster than regulation, when innovation outran responsibility, and when prototypes crossed lines without permission. This machine began as a question. What happens if we remove every constraint? No cost ceiling, no regulatory target, no safety compromise, just pure capability. Designers stripped away conventions. Weight was cut aggressively. Structural tolerances pushed beyond norms. Redundancies eliminated. Every decision favored performance. Nothing favored survival. On track. The prototype was astonishing. Acceleration felt violent. Cornering loads overwhelmed human senses. Braking distances collapsed. Drivers stepped out shaking, not smiling, because the car didn't communicate limits. It didn't warn. It simply reacted. At low speeds, it felt manageable. At high speeds, it felt alien. Engineers noticed something unsettling. The faster it went, the less predictable it became. Aerodynamics shifted behavior dynamically. Grip appeared and vanished without notice. Mechanical balance changed mid-corner. Simulation models couldn't keep up. Human reflexes couldn't either. This prototype had surpassed a point where intuition mattered, and that terrified the people who built it. Because once a machine outpaces understanding, control becomes an illusion. Still, the numbers were tempting, record-breaking, unprecedented. Executives asked the obvious question. Could it be refined? Could it be tamed? Engineers hesitated, because taming it meant changing its essence. What they had created wasn't unfinished. It was complete, and completeness, in this case, was the problem. Because releasing this prototype wouldn't just challenge competitors, it would challenge the idea that humans belong at the center of control. Attempts to civilize the prototype began immediately. Software limits were added. Power delivery was softened. Aerodynamic elements were restricted. Each change made it slower and safer. But each change also revealed resistance, not mechanical, philosophical, because the prototype had been built around extremes. It didn't respond well to compromise. It lost coherence. Drivers reported strained behavior, lag where immediacy once existed, instability replacing sharpness. The car no longer felt dangerous. It felt confused. Engineers realized something critical. This machine only made sense at full intent. Partial restraint broke the balance. That meant releasing it safely. Required redesigning it entirely. Costs skyrocketed instantly. Timelines dissolved. The original purpose evaporated. Executives pushed back. There was pressure to salvage something. A halo model. A limited run. But risk assessments told a clear story. Even minor errors at speed would have catastrophic consequences. Liability models were brutal. One incident would erase years of progress, and possibly lives. Test drivers spoke openly now. This wasn't fear. It was respect. They said the prototype demanded reaction times, beyond human limits, beyond learning curves. No amount of training solved it, only caution. And caution was not what the car was built for. As word spread internally, support evaporated quietly. The project wasn't canceled dramatically. It was starved, funding redirected, staff reassigned, test schedules shortened. The prototype returned to storage, covered, cataloged, not destroyed, preserved, because even in rejection, it represented a boundary, a point where engineering crossed ahead of humanity. And boundaries, once found, tend to matter later, because the ideas inside this machine weren't going away. They were only waiting for a world that could handle them. And that realization would stop everything. Years passed, but the prototype never faded. It lived quietly in design studios, in whispered comparisons, in simulations run late at night. Engineers referenced it carefully, not as a goal, as a warning, because the data remained undeniable. The concepts worked. The performance was real. What failed was the context. As regulations evolved, as driver aids improved, the prototype's ideas resurfaced. Piece by piece, active aerodynamics appeared in production cars. Materials once considered excessive became standard. Control systems grew faster, smarter, predictive. The industry began catching up. What once overwhelmed human reflexes could now be moderated by computation. What once felt alien began to feel intuitive again. But the prototype itself remained untouched, because rebuilding it would erase the lesson. It represented a moment of imbalance, when ambition outran responsibility, when capability exceeded control. Designers revisited its blueprints often. They admired the courage. They respected the restraint that followed. Some argued it deserved release now, in a world of automation and safeguards. Others disagreed. They said the danger wasn't just speed, it was temptation. Once proven possible, pressure would return, limits would be challenged again, and that cycle had consequences. The prototype had done its job, not by winning races, not by selling units, but by showing the edge clearly. It taught the industry where mastery ends and recklessness begins, and that knowledge shaped everything that followed. Sometimes the most important machines are the ones that never reach the road, because their greatest contribution is teaching us when to stop. The prototype still exists somewhere, locked away, silent, not as a failure, as a reference point. Every engineer who encounters it feels the same tension, admiration mixed with restraint, possibility balanced against consequence. It represents a moment when humanity stepped just ahead of itself, when creation outpaced control, and wisdom intervened. That restraint mattered, because it set a precedent. Not everything that can be built should be released. Today's fastest, smartest cars carry traces of this machine's ideas. Filtered, measured, humanized, the prototype gave the industry permission to pause, to ask harder questions, to respect limits again. And that pause shaped the future more than speed ever could. Because real progress isn't crossing every boundary. It's knowing which ones to leave standing. Subscribe to join the journey. A